All right, man, let's talk about it. Let's do it.
Welcome back, listeners, or if you are new, welcome to the Digital Divide podcast. I am Justin Fry.
And I am Joshua Charletto.
This is episode 14, so let's cut to the chase.
All right. I like the episode number in there. That's good.
Yeah,
that's a new addition.
I think that's probably smart to do.
Yeah.
It sounds more professional. All right, so this week on the newsreel, Joshua, something that, and I don't know if you don't mind me going first.
Oh, no, I never mind.
Perfect. I actually found something by accident, and it was actually after I had been talking to my wife about getting a security system and just making her feel more secure when I'm not present or like I'm away from the house or vice versa, besides getting a dog, of course. There is an actual Alexa skill that, think of it as that the Home Alone, that scene where the main character is home and the bad guys are outside basically watching his house, and they have he's set it up so that the people are moving around and there's music playing and all that jazz. You remember that?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, pretend you do.
Okay. I already did. Pretending.
Perfect. So this skill, have you never seen that movie?
What movie are you talking
Home
about?
Alone.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I did see that movie many, many, many times. In fact, we used to watch it almost yearly, at least.
Good.
Sorry.
It's classic. I guess I didn't say... No, that's fine. I guess I didn't say it clear enough, but yes, so it's basically an Alexa skill that acts as I think of it as like a Home Alone skill. Well, basically what it does is that you can actually set things up, timers, etc., and have the Alexa play like a series of pre-recorded messages or dialogues. And what's really funny is that one of them, I think, is actually two couples fighting or breaking up, which I think is fantastic and totally sadistic. But you can have this app play, and it will play through all the speakers that you have, I think more or less to echo it, but to play as if somebody were home with the lights on, etc., etc., which is really cool and kind of silly, but actually practical in the same way, because I bet you somebody said, wouldn't it be kind of funny but serious to have something that you can play instead of just your timing the lights, but have something play and act as if though someone was home? So it's really cool. It's called away mode, essentially, and I think it's available right now. And it has 7 tracks currently at the launch of it. So it can go, I guess in this article I posted, it has the tracks range from stay-at-home mom going insane to a couple breaking up. So I think while watching some TV, I like the little detail there. So it's interesting. There are comedy sketches. It echoes a comedy sketch from Saturday Night Live. So it's pretty funny.
That sounds awesome.
Yes.
But, of course, nothing is so good that it can't be better. And I would only hope that they would add the actual scene that the kid in Home Alone played.
Yes.
With snakes and the Tommy gun and, oh my gosh. But that's fantastic. I would just want to listen to him just for fun.
Yeah, and I think that's fantastic that you came up with that. That's actually a smart idea. I'm trying to figure out where the name of the developer of who created this, so I'm going to send a message to them. That would be funny. But I'm sure people have already sent that to him, him or her, depending on if they are a fan of the movie. So, but yeah, the article's in the notes if you guys want to take a look.
That's a good one.
Cool.
Well, this week I wanted to, after your awesome, hilarious article, I'm going to add a serious article. Not semi-serious, very serious. Apparently, there has been some investigative work, and I guess it's been found out that the FCC actually was never hacked. And I think that hack took place a few years ago or a year ago. Oh my gosh, I have the article and I don't even know.
Yeah,
anyway,
a year plus.
Yeah, it was like a year ago. And enough questions were asked and enough evidence wasn't provided to the point now where it's clear that it was fabricated, that hack, and it's been reported at several different places. So this article I put in the notes is from TechCrunch, which is a pretty popular technology blog / news site.
It's like Wired and whatnot.
So I would say it's pretty credible, and they're finding that even farther back there might be one that also might have been fabricated, and that just makes me sad. Just makes me real sad that that's even a possibility, that a governmental agency would fabricate something like that, and yet we all know that it has to happen at some level inside of the government at some point. So it's just sad, just very sad.
Yeah, and it's just, to me, it makes me question. I mean, it does, not that we haven't already been questioning a lot of the decisions lately, and obviously not to get political, but just it seems to have happened relatively within the last 2 years, possibly with this administration. So just curious, lots of he said, she said things going on here. But yeah, it's disappointing, but then I'm not surprised. So
yeah, and I would like to take this moment to re-underline that no agency or corporation is 100% trustworthy unless it's you yourself. So just remember that when you're putting your information in places, what information you're putting there, and that you're giving it away to somebody that you don't know what they're actually doing.
Right, and just to point out, to be fair with this administration, which I'm sure is what the word I'm looking for. People might
controversial.
Yeah, but this happened before the transition, and even in the article itself, the chairman, and I can never pronounce his name.
Yeah, something.
But that he's basically stating that the Obama administration / his former chief information officer provided inaccurate information about the incident to him and Congress and the American people. So this isn't specifically pointing to this administration, but just really roughly around the same time. So take that with a grain of salt. It could have been something that bled over from the last administration, lack of caring about providing the information to them. I don't know, but just kind of makes you want to say, get your act together.
Yeah, it definitely, as you just pointed out, definitely happened during the Obama administration, but it's clear that they didn't come forward even now until somebody actually found out. So yeah, everybody's at fault. Stop pointing fingers. Knock it off.
Don't do it again.
Yeah. Anyway, that's it. It's in the show notes. It's not very long, quick and easy. And every site that reports on tech news will have something similar or some kind of similar article. So yeah, I would encourage to go do some more research and look up some more articles.
Yeah, and I'm sure the varying of opinions will bleed through each of those articles. So just again, take it with a grain of salt when you look through some of the bigger tech reporting news conglomerates or whatever. So, anyways, enough about that. Let's go and move straight into the follow-up, which we actually have this time.
That's impressive. We have follow-up.
Both of us. And one thing being with our last episode, which feels like forever ago, when we talked about back-to-school technology, there was actually something released shortly after, and I think actually immediately after we recorded the episode. But Microsoft came out with their Surface Book Go, which is supposed to be, I would say, a direct competitor to the iPad and even the iPad Pro.
As close as they're going to get.
Exactly.
Microsoft.
So it starts at $400. You're basically looking at what looks like a glorified first-gen version of the Surface, which had a mobile version of Windows 10, or I guess Windows 8 at the time, that only allowed you to pick up Microsoft created applications basically through their App Store. And I guess that doesn't include only Microsoft, but basically anything in their version of the App Store. And I don't know how to explain this, but I'm not impressed, and I'm actually surprised that I'm not impressed.
Yeah, so just to be really clear, they're using Windows RT.
Well, it's called S for streamline, but yes, it's basically RT.
Right. And what that means is that it is an operating system specifically built for that chipset, not for Intel chips, just that chipset. And the way that programs work is that if the program was not written to work on that chipset, which is pretty much every program ever made, it won't work on that operating system. So developers will be required, if they want it to go on the Windows Surface Go, to rebuild their applications essentially with the new chipset in mind. So just so you know how that works, that it is not going to be like Justin just said, you will have to go to their app store and use their apps, which may be very scarce.
Yeah. And scarce, limited, and you might find yourself looking for an app you're used to using and having to find an alternative that isn't always quality. I can't think of off the top of my head, but I'm sure there's applications that you grew fond of or things that you've downloaded from third-party websites, and you won't. I'm not saying you won't be able to use them, but there's a slight chance that you'll have to find an alternative. So, the price for things like 4 gigs of RAM, 64 gigs of space, and it comes with a micro or an SD slot. I think it's in a standard size SD slot, so you can have additional storage in there as well. But I mean, the specs are nice. It's just, to me, it's not really impressive because a lot of the reviews, and I think the one I included, their first response was that it's actually pretty slow, which is not something you want to hand out to somebody, or right from the get-go. When you already have somebody complaining about it being slow, it's a little concerning, especially if it's going up against, I mean, even the 6th gen iPad or the iPad Pro. Those things are, I'm not kidding when I say this, but they're flawless. They just, even the Pro itself is smooth as butter when you're cycling through applications. So that I'm sure it's great and will fit certain people's requirements, but for $400, and you don't get everything included, it's not something I would go for. But just interesting that it came up recently.
Yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I do want to cover a couple more things about it, if you don't mind. So,
please.
I think it's the right kind of move that Microsoft should be making. I mean, I just want to highlight the different approaches and why it's different. So, it's essentially the same type of thing as an iPad, but because of the way that Apple approached the iPad and the iPhone, it kind of dictated the success of their product. And the difference is really, really minimal, but it is important. And that is that Microsoft has marketed all of their products as full-blown computers. Like all of their Surface products, they have marketed as full computers. And that's the way that they have marketed their operating system on all of their computers. They want you to think that it is just a full computer that you can switch between being a tablet and a PC with no compromises. And there's more to that as well, that I disagree with that approach. But when you are marketing it that way, people are going to expect it to be a full computer. And what does it mean to be a computer? It means that your browsing sessions and your Word documents and your Excel sheets are quick and fast and snappy. And it sounds like that's not the case for this. The difference that Apple had, because they did the same thing, their phones and iPads have different chips. They're not Intel chips.
Right.
But the product itself is marketed and differentiated in such a way that people do not have the same expectations. It's not the same device as a computer in people's minds. So they would not bring those expectations to the table when they're using that device. And then it took years for Apple to build up the App Store to have the apps with parity on the computer. So Microsoft has a lot of room to cover here and a lot of work to do if they're going to doubled down on this, and I think that's usually their main problem, is that they come out with some great ideas or some mediocre ideas, and then they don't commit, and they just kind of wait and see what happens. If you're going to do this, you need to commit, and we'll see how that goes.
One more thing before you go to yours. The one thing I will note is that you can actually, it comes with the Microsoft Windows 10s, but you can install the full version of Windows 10, but just something to keep in mind, 4 gigabytes of RAM I think is the minimal requirements for Windows 10, and you're already running on a chip that is not optimized for Windows 10, so I would strongly discourage that. If you do buy this, stick with the
yes,
the
for
S.
sure.
But if you're already wanting to upgrade to Windows 10 on that, you're already going with the wrong product. You should just get the normal Surface at that point.
Correct.
So.
Windows 10 is really improved in terms of Windows, but that improvement comes at the cost of performance, and it is a hog of an operating system. So adding it to an already compromised device is going to be a big problem.
Correct. All right, let's stop talking about Surface Book and let's move on to your follow-up so we can get into the topic today.
Sure. So I just wanted to quickly follow up kind of a similar situation. We talked about Apple making $53.3 billion in Q3 last episode, and I said that they were within striking distance of $1 trillion valuation. And then the next day they hit $1 trillion valuation.
It was like almost clockwork.
It was like just right as they opened the next day or something. So they are now a $1 trillion company, which is also ridiculous.
And awesome.
They're basically printing money at this point. So I am an Apple fanboy, and I like to see them succeed, but it is also interesting to see if there's going to be an end to this trend.
Right, and I don't want to get... I hope that doesn't happen, and I hope that both companies, major companies, flourish, because competition is what drives some of the innovation that happens with both products or both companies. So I'm hoping that stays at bay for a while.
Same.
Cool.
Anyway, just wanted to put that out there.
All right, so this week's episode is really going to be an interesting one, or the topic it is, because we're going to be talking about something that I won't say is controversial, but more or less there are some opinions about it, and some people might... I give some people credit for talking about it because it can be not embarrassing. What's the word I'm looking for? Not telling of something, but it's uncomfortable to talk about because it's something they enjoy, but it could just be portrayed as something that's silly. But I disagree.
We're overselling it already, and I appreciate you introducing it that way.
You're
because
welcome.
It's not something like hunger in Africa.
God no. We're talking about like something completely different.
Yeah. But there are a lot of old stigmas and opinions that are slowly going away over time. It seems to grow more into the mainstream as time goes on. So what Justin's talking about is playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes. Yeah, and I guess to what has made it more mainstream lately, and this is going to sound silly, but I think Stranger Things, the TV show, made it more appealing.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, I could see that.
To younger generations, specifically after watching it, because I mean the main characters are huge nerds, which I think is fantastic, and there needs to be more things like that. But these kids are the main characters, and they start off the TV show with them playing Dungeons and Dragons, which is fantastic. So and they portrayed it perfectly, I think. In a sense where it's through, was it 4 kids playing around in their parents' basement and eating junk food, and the sister comes down to yell at them, and the mom's like, "Come up," and blah blah blah. So I think it's fantastic. But yeah, we're talking about D&D more specifically. I actually had my first, what would you call it? Game night?
Session,
yes.
Yep.
This last Friday, and that session was actually ran by Josh. So
hi, I'm Josh.
Yes,
I ran the session.
So I have a couple questions that I set up, and maybe I don't know if we need to talk about like what D&D is. I don't know if that's
well, let's kind of preface it a little bit.
So explain, because you are the master behind this.
No, that's not true, but I do play it occasionally. So the idea is that it's essentially a game, and like many games, there are rules and there are players, and the idea behind this game is that you don't need a board, although some people play it with a board. But the idea is that you use your imagination to, how do I describe it? Use your imagination to role play characters, but also provide positioning in this imaginary space for battles and for dungeoneering and all kinds of things. And the problem is that Dungeons and Dragons has become the catch-all term, kind of like Kleenex for tissue, for a whole wide range of different games within this hobby. And everybody seems to play it very differently. So there is the set of players that do roll out a map with a whole grid on it, and then put down these little figurines they painted, similar to what you see in Stranger Things.
Right.
And then they pull out a whole big lot of dice, basically, and then they fight monsters. And then there's people who dress up as the characters, and this is
not what we did on
something
Friday.
I've ever done, but they dress up as the characters, and they go frolic into the woods, and they actually play the character for X amount of time.
That's insane.
And I mean, that gets really extreme. There's people in like Sweden that live their characters' lives for days on end, and
it's like LARPing
crazy.
To the extreme.
Yeah, it is. It's called LARPing. It's live action role play. That's LARP.
Boom.
And it's not something that I have never wanted to do or have done, because for me, I don't know why, it just crosses the line. Anyway, so
yes.
So there are a lot of different ways that people do this hobby and play these games of imagination, essentially. But the idea is that you have a set of rules that govern what you can and can't do with your character, and govern what does and doesn't happen at the table.
Right.
And so through this shared set of rules and shared imaginary space, you basically create stories together. I do my best. I think that's as close as I
think that's pretty good. It's like telling a story with characters who interact with the story itself and the characters that are encountered. And what Josh really did, and I don't want to get into details, but Josh, who's really telling the story? Is it one person, or is it the collection, like the characters and the person leading it? Basically, what I'm asking is, who's leading the session?
Well, yeah. So you can't. Well, okay. I shouldn't say it that way. There obviously are a lot of different ways to play, but traditionally, there's one person who runs the game, and so in Dungeons and Dragons, they call that person the Dungeon Master.
Ooh, mysterious music in the background.
But a lot of typical games also call them the Game Master, or the Master of Ceremonies, or lots of different names for that person. But essentially, that person plays everything that the players are not. So the players get to choose their one character, and they control their one character, and then the person running the game controls everything else. All the other people in the world, all the other things in the world, everything in the world, which sometimes can get pretty daunting. So, also traditionally, that person who runs the game usually, or at least used to, depending on the game, bring a pre-generated set of story or dungeons or things for the characters and players to do.
Right.
That's kind of been challenged lately with some of the newer games, but essentially it's stayed pretty much the same, where instead of it being the one person telling the story at the head of the table, it's become more collaborative over the years. So that's kind of nice.
Right. And I like the fact that over the years it's developed into different branches, different games, essentially, like Pathfinder, and you were telling me about is Exalted, right?
Oh God, yeah, Exalted.
So there's so many different things, and they're not always like fantasy. There are other D&D or D&D like not board games. What I don't know what the heck they call them. Games that
role-playing games.
Have role-playing games that have different themes to them. And so I guess that was good. I think that's a pretty good explanation really quickly for those who are still listening about Dungeons and Dragons. But
well, before you go on from that, I do also want to point out that people play the game for different reasons. And that plays into the fact that you just listed some other types of games that get played.
Right.
And some of them play to different strengths. But the idea is that some people play to simulate like a different world that they can have some kind of effect on. Some people play to actually game the game. Those people are the typical people that love the sheet and all the numbers and, really creating the characters and getting into all the different abilities and how to build them just right. And then some people play for the story. And those are the narrative people who really enjoy less about the simulation and less about the games aspect of it and more about what's the story we're telling, who are the characters, how do they change over time. So there's a lot of different sub people, I guess, underneath all three of those, but those are the big main ones that usually get talked about. And so different games play to different strengths, and that's why there are so many out there.
Yeah. And I will keep note because I will comment on why I like it and why I wanted to partake in it. So, but I guess I can explain. Well, that's kind of part of what this story behind wanting to do this is. So, like Josh and I think have been contemplating it. We talk about it every once in a while. Like, hey, we should really just start up a session. I think it would be really fun. Josh has friends who play it. And he's played with his friends for years, and there have been several sessions, I'm sure, variations of characters that were used and reused, but I've never actually had a set of people or friends that I would want to play this with. Yeah. One, because I had to get over the fact, and Josh and I were talking about this before we started, but I wanted to get over the fact that what would people think if I said I wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons? And I will note that when I told my mom about this, she said, "Oh, you're such a goofball." And so I laughed when she said that. So thanks, Mom. No hard feelings.
A whole thing to that too. I don't know because I wasn't really conscious enough, but there was a whole set of circumstances that happened way back in the 80s where it gave Dungeons and Dragons a huge stigma, and a lot of people have opinions about it. And then on top of that, I don't think that there's too many levels of nerdism below Dungeons and Dragons or role-playing games.
No.
There's
LARPing, I think,
and LARPing is one of them. Yeah.
LARPing is definitely at the extreme.
But basically, the people like me who have played those games or play those games, we're scraping the bottom of the barrel at this point with nerdism. So,
yeah.
Anyway, there's a whole stigma behind it.
Right, and so after I think we had gotten over the fact, or at least I had gotten over the fact that I would never find anybody that would want to play with it. It kind of like died off that want. I grew up playing World of Warcraft, and that was my D&D, and that itself had a stigmatism when it came out, and a lot of people were like, "Oh, wow, you're playing World of Warcraft, you're a loser." So I still played it regardless of what people thought, and spent a lot of time on that. So it just kind of never happened until I met Josh, and Josh had eventually, I think after a while, you opened up saying that you had played it or liked playing it, and deep down inside I was like giddily or like super excited because I was waiting for the right time to say, hey, we should try and play once or something. And so that's why I was very happy when Josh approached me and said, would you like to start a session up? And that his friends wanted to play too, which was even more exciting for me because I felt as though you guys were letting me into something that you've already had going on for years. So that was exciting in itself. But
there's one game that is on hiatus, but we've played it in many different mediums. So that would be anything from tabletop to email to chat based, but it's been going on, oh my gosh, since like high school.
Nice.
Essentially. So we've had those same characters, that same story going forever. And that's my favorite GM or game master that actually runs it and really taught me how to play the game. And that's that same group of friends that you actually got to play with. And we have a very specific, even though we all have our own style when we play or run, we, as a group, as with every group, we have a very specific way of playing the game that when I went and actually played Dungeons and Dragons, so, you know, just like you encountered with me, people don't normally like meet each other and go, "Hey, my name's Josh. I play Dungeons and Dragons."
Yeah. So, there's no DAA group sitting around.
There's like a ramp up period where you kind of, you know, feel out how nerdy the other person is. Yeah. And then anyway, but I eventually found another group after this group of friends had moved away to college, and I went to play with them, this new group, and it was one guy I knew from my work that I had worked at the time, and then this group that he had found online. So it was super sketchy. Wow. And I was like, this is going to be crazy. And yeah, it was. It was really weird, and also they played very much by the rules and by the book, and it wasn't about story. It was so weird.
It's like a competition?
I will never forget what that was like. And I ended up playing for a while with them just because I wanted to keep playing. But it was very strange. And it also was very boring to me. I kept playing because I liked them as people and it was very social. But yeah. I spent a lot of time sitting back in my chair, like looking at my phone or just, you know, listening to and making jokes while we were sitting there because I didn't really care about the game. And that kind of highlights what I mentioned before. For me, the game is really about telling a story and enjoying a story and building that story together and what we discover together as we build that story. So anyway, that's the long rant.
Yeah, I know. And so that's actually what I was happy to experience, that I was happy that when we had our session just the other day, that it didn't feel like I was in a room full of people who are extremely competitive and wanted to win, essentially, quote, win the game or be the best of the best. It was really about storytelling, and I think, to me, that's what's exciting and the most rewarding experience out of it, because I'm a huge fan of reading, and I think this might be another reason why people like playing D&D, is that you're essentially writing a story yourself with your friends. And some of those conversations could turn into books and comics and things like that. And we've seen that happen through various podcasts, various avenues. And I'm not saying that's what our intention on that was. It was just, for me, it's like an outlet for me to use my imagination, which honestly has been on hold for such a long time and buried because I haven't found anybody to, you know, play something like this or to express it this way. Yeah. So granted, it's in a closed group of people, but I mean, I got home and was hysterically laughing. I mean, I still was laughing at things that were said, and it was serious at times, but like I enjoyed every second of me struggling to understand like what dice I had to roll or what my, you know, what modifiers I had for some of my characteristics and what I shouldn't do when there's a room full of people trying to kill me and we're running away and I wanted to do something stupid. And I was made fun of. I enjoyed that. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because what I like about it is that shared fiction, like you mentioned, and you get to author parts of the game and you get to author the story together, and it's ultimately a social engagement. Like you get together, you make jokes, you have fun, and you play a game. And it's essentially a more complicated board game, even though I'm really underselling it at this point, but without the board. So anyway, yeah, so it's a lot of fun, and I'm glad that you enjoyed the session. So what other questions did you have for me?
Well, I guess I guess not just for you, but more or less for like the conversation or to the conversation itself, that we did select the 5th version of Dungeons and Dragons, so it wasn't a spin-off or wasn't a like a carry on. Oh yeah, it was like the original D&D version 5, and I know there are people
talk for hours on the different versions.
Yeah, so there are people who are really, really for one version and the other. I think Josh and the group decided it would be better to start from here for me as a starting point. And I hope that we will continue to do that and then to branch off into other avenues. But yeah, so what happens with these new versions? Like, can you explain why there are new versions? What becomes of these new versions? Like, does it bring new characters? What does it do?
Yeah, so the basic idea is that these are games and they're created by companies that need to make money. And so these companies want to keep making money, and to do that, what they do is they continue to iterate on the rules and tighten or change or add or remove rules or pieces from the game. And by doing that, they can republish the rules and make money off the books. That's the really, I don't know, cold version of it, I guess. The other version, or the other idea behind it, is that the tastes of people and culture change, and they are trying to keep up with the times in terms of what they're delivering to their players. So I'm totally making it sound way more complicated and involved than it is, but Dungeons & Dragons, the first version ever created, was really loose and really strange, and it was based off of some guy, okay, so it was Gary Gygax, who actually died recently, unfortunately. Rest in peace. He took, I believe it was him and somebody else, they took the rules from this broadside ship battle game that either they created, I'm really fuzzy on it, but they took this ship battle game and they used those rules to simulate these fantasy characters in a dungeon. And so it was really, really loose and really light, and they just kind of made rules as they went, and eventually they ended up publishing the book for people to buy, and that was the first version of Dungeons & Dragons. And over time, they added and removed rules, and that's when we got to the second version of Dungeons & Dragons, and it was more codified rule set. It was more, lots more dice involved, lots more about delving into the dungeon and using rules to tell you what does and doesn't happen. Whereas the first set of rules were very much like, okay, well, if we don't have something here, make it up. Or if we don't have something here that covers that, figure out how to roll a die or figure out how to narrate it. And over time, I'm not going to go through every version, goodness gracious. But over time,
quite a lot.
Yeah. Over time, they got into a very standard set of rules that lasted for a long time. That was version 3 and 3.5. Those stuck around for a while. And the best thing they ever did during that time was they opened the rules. It was part of an open gaming license, OGL. So they had the standard set of rules were open to be used by anybody. And so we had this basically renaissance of third-party book publishers creating rules for Dungeons & Dragons. And so you had hundreds upon hundreds of different rule sets and rules that could be added on. It was kind of like this modular idea, which was neat. But the rules were really, at that point, had gotten really convoluted and really complicated. And the problem with doing that is when you want to continue the hobby and get new people added to the rules, there's a lot of explaining and a lot to it. So you're not going to get a lot of new people. And they realized that. And so the next version, they really stripped it down and made it very World of Warcrafty. And that's the way that we always describe it. It was you really didn't build your character. You kind of chose what kind of character you wanted to make, and then it told you every level what you had and got, and you didn't make any choices about it. And that got super rejected, and nobody bought the books, and everybody was slamming them for it, and blah, blah, blah. So then what they did was they did this huge, long, I guess you could call it beta test, even though it's not software, where they called it D&D Next, and they promised a lot of different things, but they kept play testing with all these different groups around the country to suss out what players actually wanted and what should be there or not. And I think it lasted a while. It was like a year or something. And then they finally published the 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons, which is what we have now. And I would say it's probably the best version. Not probably. It is absolutely the best version that I've seen yet. So good job to them. It's very light and easy to play, but also lots of strategy and complicated enough for the people who really like that.
Yeah, and it's funny because as you were talking, I went to the D&D website, and I'm going to try and post or link some of the information. There's like an actual story behind, or sorry, what is D&D section that goes over everything and also like the history behind it. So that might be interesting for some people, but I'm looking at like all the different editions and different, we'll call them expansions, where they have like other stories that are happening. So I guess I didn't realize that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but some of these books will literally have a story you go through and you have to be the character you built and you go through those steps, and it's really like predetermined by the book rather than the DM.
Yeah, so along with having a hobby, you again need to run your company and make money. And also you want to add to the hobby and show people how to play the game, but also for the people who don't have the ability to create stories maybe as quickly or understand well enough how to, they build these what are called modules, or like you said, stories that are pre-built and then published. And so it's another way for them to build and publish books that then people can buy and run. Like you said, it's a whole story in this book and outlines all the different factions and gives you maps of everything. And basically they spend time and develop this huge story and all the different pieces that go with it. So the maps, the characters that will be encountered, where they are. I mean, they're basically world building on a pretty huge scale. And what they'll do is they'll build different modules or these adventure books for different level characters. So you can literally pick up one book, go from levels 1 to 5, then pick up the next book and go from 5 to 10, then pick up the next book and go from 10 to... I mean, it's cool and it's fun and it's pre-generated, and then on top of that they get to make their money too. So you mentioned earlier a different game, and I'm not going to go into this, but made by a different company called Pathfinder is the name of the game.
Yeah.
And they built their business completely around that. So they actually give away the rules almost for free online, even more open than the old open rule set used to be. They give it all away, but they make their money off of selling the adventure books and the supplemental books, and they have quite a few books out, more so than Wizards of the Coast, who makes Dungeons & Dragons. So that's the business, is publishing the books and getting people to buy the books. And so now here we are in the digital age, and they're having kind of a crisis of faith these days because they are publishing these books, and then people want the PDF versions because they have things like laptops and iPads.
Yeah.
And those PDFs can get shared very easily. So in this kind of niche hobby, you already have a very small audience, and amongst that small audience, they're usually cheap people. Sorry, everybody, I'm not trying to make a generalization. No. But then they just pass around the PDF and they don't make money off of publishing the books. So it's interesting. And I can't imagine trying to run that business because it's got to be like scratching the surface every time on making money.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point that out because some people might go back or might be interested in wanting to see the different worlds of D&D. So my interpretation was that it was really just people following a book, but after talking to you and talking to other people who have played it and watching people play it, it really varies depending on the way you want to play it. If you want to play it very scripted and where it's like playing a real role-playing game, a video game, you can do that, or you can do something that to me seems more fun and sometimes stressful and sometimes nerve-wracking because you guys are trying to basically build your story. But to me that makes it more exciting because you have control over it, or at least some of you have control over it, and you can really tell a story from out of nothing, which I think is pretty much what we started with, and it just started to flow. I mean, when we started playing, I didn't know where it was going to go. We started explaining like the environment, the people, the story behind each other, and then boom, all of a sudden we were just going and going and going. And I think that played a part with you, Josh, really like guiding us. But then the reactions and from the other two players at the time, so it was fantastic, I think, and I hope I continue to play with you guys moving forward. But yeah, it's a whole chapter for me. I wish I would have done this a long time ago, because now my bookshelves will probably be filled with these books now. I plan on getting some after we play a little bit more, just so that I have one for myself, because I like physical copies of things as much as we're in a digital age. I really don't. Something about having the book on the shelf is really cool to me.
Yeah,
and they're awesome to look at.
They are great, and they're so fun to read. I know it sounds so nerdy. Not that any other part of this podcast has been nerdy, but they are so fun to read. There's so much to them. More. Yeah. And you mentioned a game called Exalted a long time in the podcast ago. And that game is hard for me to talk about because it's such a good game and used to be such a good game. Well, it still is such a good game, but they have changed it so much over the years, and it's not made by the same company. It's made by a different company. And the thing about that game is that company that has created those games, they're called White Wolf, they have always been more into the world building and less about rules. And so you pick up their books, and half the book is laying out, here's the world, here's a whole map of the world, here's where everything is, these are all the different major factions moving and shaking in the world. And that's not what D&D does. D&D is very open and very much like, here's the characters you can play, and then you build your own story, or you buy one of our pre-generated adventures. White Wolf games do more storytelling, as they call it, which I, for reasons that I won't go into, is kind of debunked these days, but they will lay out an entire world for you and tell you to use it as your sandbox. And so it's a different approach. And obviously lots of different games have a different approach. So it's interesting. There's a lot of fun ways to play and a lot of different things you can do.
Yeah, and I hope, and this is an idea that Josh, or at least I have had a dream of, recording some of what we talk about, or not talk about, but recording some of the sessions, because I feel like that would be kind of cool. I know there are podcasts out there that do it, and there is comedy, when we're playing, and comments that are made, and certain people are a little, may or
rowdy?
May not be. Yeah, some people are a little rowdier than the others. So I think it'd be a lot of fun. Granted, we can get to that point, but like deep down inside, I'm like, oh my God, this is a perfect opportunity for us to record something, and I think it'd be a lot of fun.
But yeah, doing that has always been kind of a dream of mine. And I actually would go back to where we started this and say that I would say podcasting is the biggest reason that it has become more mainstream these days. There's so much content of people recording, people playing, or YouTube videos of people playing. And it ranges from, just boring rolling dice, watching somebody actual play Dungeons & Dragons, to something like, I know you love this podcast, The Adventure Zone.
Oh, so good. I'm going to link that in the
yeah, you should, because it's more than just listening to them play. They're really, though vulgar, they're very much hilarious comedians, and they're hilarious to listen to while they play this game. And so it ranges, and I think I would give that a lot more credit to bringing it more mainstream these days, because that everybody seems to be doing it that way. And I've listened to a lot of these types of actual play podcasts, is what they're called typically, and I've wanted to do one of my own for a long time. So maybe someday we'll do that.
Yes, and I'm excited for that day. But I will enjoy the sessions that we have moving forward, the late nights, and really just the kind of camaraderie and laughing that will happen during those times. So I'm looking forward to it, and the food and stuff that we consume while it's going on. So the little things make it that much better.
Yeah, it's very much a social gathering, so it's a good time. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think I don't want to get into any more D&D because I think they explain one what it is for those who don't know anything about it, and kind of explains why all of a sudden I wanted to jump in, and how like basically the rhetoric behind D&D has changed from the last 20 years. So, but thank you for explaining that, Josh. I appreciate it. I hope people were able to understand what's going on in D&D and like why D&D is really and totally socially acceptable. There's nothing wrong with it.
Well, at least we're not doing witchcraft, which is what was originally believed about it way back in the day.
We're definitely not doing that. So do you mind? Let's go ahead and jump right into our rant, unless you have something else to say.
No, I think that's good.
Perfect. You can go ahead first because I went first with both the follow-up and the newsreel.
So I don't want to talk about more news because we have a whole section for that. However, something that has changed this last week is that Apple closed down its affiliate program, the App Store affiliate program. So what's an affiliate program? Well, you are some kind of company like a blog or a app review website, say, and you review apps and then you link to the place where people can buy that app or that game on the App Store, and Correct. You make a very small cut every time somebody clicks that and downloads the game or buys the game.
Yep.
So Amazon does this with people as well. So different people will review Amazon items, and if people click through to buy the item, they make money by reviewing it. So it's an affiliate program. Well, Apple has shut it down. So I'm going to make some people mad, I guess, but
hey, who cares?
Essentially, yeah, right. Essentially, I read a few rants about this, and I mean, I get it. It's the way that you make your money. However, nothing ever lasts forever, people, and to expect that anything will ever last forever is naive, especially when over the years, Apple has been making it harder and harder for these app review sites to really provide value. So they've been closing down different little sections of how they allow people to review and get to these apps and provide apps to people. Apple, as with everything, wants to control their app store and wants to control the experience for the users, and in doing so wants to be the people presenting the apps to the people who buy them. So that's never been different for Apple. Apple's always been that way with everything that it does. And yeah. I just read these articles where people are super upset and angry and, oh my goodness, they've ruined our lives. And I get it. You make your money that way. But if you are not able to pivot your business and change and adapt, then you're not going to be successful. I'm very sorry to say that, but business always changes. And if you can't keep ahead of the game, you're not going to be in business. And so, I don't know. I guess I'm just trying to say, try to find another way to make money. And the writing was on the wall. So, I don't know. Stop with the ranting. And rant.
I guess I don't have a problem. I really don't have any comments on this, unfortunately, so I'm sorry if I don't play into this as much. But I think this was interesting coming out roughly about the same time with the quarter earnings, as well as them hitting 1 trillion. So it's interesting, I guess.
It
food
is.
For thought.
Yeah, and I don't want to make it sound, well, I'm already out there and a jerk, but I don't know. Just, if that's the only way you're making money, you're doing something wrong.
Right.
So, I don't know.
Sorry. Well, I have my topic for the rant this week is, I guess, the same in the sense where it will probably make people angry and listen, it's not a perfect world.
Yes, I'm very excited to see what you're actually talking about with this.
So I don't know where this came up, but there was somebody made a comment at either a live show or a TV show, or I heard it in person, and I don't know why, but it stuck in my head. Somebody complaining about free range parenting, which is honestly just a fancy word for saying letting kids live their lives with as little as possible, having parents intervene with their lives, essentially. Like, they're not being helicopters and hovering over them all the time. And to me, I feel like this is like the far side of the spectrum of parenting, as coming from someone who doesn't have a child, who is not a father, but I am a son to a mother and a father, so I understand. I know, right? That's how babies are made. Anyways, my rant is that I was very frustrated because there was somebody complaining about, well, how could you let your kid out outside till the street lights come on, and when there's all these bad things that are happening, don't you want to always keep track of them? And don't you always want to know where they are, and don't you want to always be where they are to make sure that they're doing the right thing and making the right decisions? And people are basically exaggerating, saying letting your kids essentially play outside without supervision in maybe the front of your house or with other friends playing, in the cul-de-sac kickball, which is what I did as a kid without any parents for hours and hours. And I mean, there was times where it'd be pitch black outside and we'd be still playing there. Somebody was yelling, or not yelling, but basically saying, how could you do something like that? I just don't get why you would want to hover over your kid and control everything they're doing. I think that's wrong. There's so many things wrong behind it. You become your kid will become very sheltered and attached to you, and there are all sorts of bad things that can happen by being too much of a helicopter and hovering over them and guiding them into the path that you want them to be. So I was raised not free range, because that's, again, extreme, but my parents, as they were caring of me and made sure they knew where I was at all times, but there was times where I'd be out playing in middle school where I was out till the lights came on, and even after that, my parents just wanted me to check in. Hey, I'm still playing ball tag with my friends down the block, and I would come in at like 10 o'clock, and my parents wouldn't have even been worried because I was in my neighborhood. So relax, don't hover over your kids. They're going to get hurt. Let them get hurt. That's how they learn. And if they don't get hurt, they're going to end up being attached to you for the rest of your life, and you will never get them out at age 28. So, or 29 or 30 or whatever, when they're still living with you. So, yeah, that's end rant.
Oh boy, Justin, that is a giant can of worms there, sir.
It's okay. I'm fine with that. And I of course, again, like I said, it's coming from somebody who doesn't have a child. But
yeah, so with anything, there's a middle ground. And
yes,
I think that it is irresponsible to let your child free range. And it is also not something you want to hover over them constantly. But
no, God, no.
There's a difference between letting them scrape their knee and not supervising them. So,
moderation. That's all I'm asking for.
I also argue that today is a lot different than it used to be when you and I even grew up. So, we used to play outside at a pretty young age by ourselves, sure.
Yeah.
I'm not comfortable with that these days. I'm just not. There's so much going on, even in my own neighborhood, that it's just not the same. And with that, then you don't need to be standing over them, but you do need to supervise that they're still there and okay.
Yeah.
So,
and that's why technology was invented, so you can have things like Find My Friends and follow your kids with their phones or in their pockets.
Yeah. I mean, for the older kids, that makes sense. But, there's just so much going on in the world today, even just at home. So you never know. You just never know. And there is a middle. So find the middle and be there.
Yes, exactly. Well said. So, and ask me in a year or 2 or 3 or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
How I feel about this topic, and we'll see if anything has changed. But I think for me, the way my parents raised me, I will hold dear to myself, and hopefully that I will portray the same sort of trust that they gave me, but also obviously paying attention and caring for me or for my children and making sure their well-being is always put first, and make sure that they're not going crazy running around being hooligans. So
yeah. Yep, totally. And parenting is, as a subject, like politics. Everybody has an opinion and they think that everybody else is wrong, and it gets really, really catty. So it's a dangerous topic.
Worry about your own kid. That's all I say.
Cool.
All right, cool. Well, thanks everybody for listening to our 14th episode. You can follow the show on Twitter at @DigitalDividePC, or send us feedback by sending us an email easily through your normal emailing medium at askdigitaldivide@gmail.com. You can also check us out on our website, where all this information is located, at www.digitaldividepodcast.com. Finally, you can follow us, our personal accounts, if you would like. I am on Twitter at JustinFry121. Josh, where can people find you?
On Twitter, you can find me at jcharletto. That's my first initial, last name, CIARLETTO. And you can also email me at josh@charletto.com.
If you liked this episode or any of our other episodes, please give us a review on iTunes or anywhere podcasts are heard. And then until next time, take care.
Bye.